Well, new polling data from NBC News and the Des Moines Register showing a majority of Iowa Republican caucus goers still believe Donald Trump's claims that he won the 2020 election. 51% say that they believe Trump's claims of victory, despite no evidence to support those claims. 41% do not believe the claim, while 8% are not sure. The poll includes both Republican and independent voters who say they are likely to take part in the caucus. And joining me now, NBC News senior political editor Mark Murray and USA Today Washington bureau chief Susan Page. Welcome both. So, Mark, walk us through these new data from Iowa. So these are made up of caucus goers who believe that Donald Trump really won the presidency.
Yeah. I think there are two ways to look at these numbers. On the one hand, you see that 51%. You might end up saying, hey, I've seen polls that show 2/3 or 3/4 of Republicans believing Donald Trump's false claims about the election. So that for 51% might seem a little small. But the way we asked this question, Andrea, was straight up. Not is Joe Biden the legitimate president or did something go wrong in the 2020 election? Do you believe straight up Donald Trump's claims that he ended up winning in 2020? 51% say yes. And but the reason that this actually might seem bigger and more substantial than even that 51% is that it makes up more than 6 in 10 evangelicals, Republican, self-identified Republicans, the key members of the Republican base are more likely to buy these claims than not. And overwhelmingly, Donald Trump, the people who choose Donald Trump as their number one choice among these likely Iowa Republican caucus goers say that Donald Trump ended up winning in 2020. So just, yet another kind of indication on if you're a Trump person, you probably end up believing this. If you are maybe a DeSantis voter or a Tim Scott voter, you're more likely to not believe his false claims.
I guess, Susan, I find it so surprising, but if you see these data, these numbers, then it makes it a little more understandable that people think he's being unfairly accused, that the indictments are not fair. If you think he really won, that the election was, quote, stolen from him, then I guess the other things flow from that.
Here's something I found quite remarkable in this poll. The poll was in the field over the time that the Georgia indictment was announced. And those who were surveyed before the Georgia indictment were announced were less likely to believe Trump was legitimately elected than those who were surveyed after. So these criminal charges of racketeering actually persuaded some voters, 6 percentage points, in fact, to believe Trump when they weren't inclined to believe him before. That shows us why these indictments haven't weakened Trump politically. They seem to have hardened his support, Andrea.
And, Mark, you also have new polling data on who people believe should be the leader of the Republican Party.
Shows 41% of likely Iowa Republican caucus goers say, yes, Donald Trump should continue as the leader of the party. About a third say Donald Trump was a good president, but maybe we need to go in a different direction and have new leaders. And then about a third of Republicans say, no, we need to go in a completely different direction.
That's interesting.
It is interesting. And it shows that more than half are maybe open to a possibility other than Donald Trump. But right now, Andrea, that 41% almost actually matches former President Donald Trump's position on the ballot and that first choice. And if you were looking in a crowded multi-candidate field where now the field is 8 or 9 Republicans, 40, 41, 42% could very well be a winning number.
Well, Susan, that brings me to New Hampshire Governor Chris Sununu, again calling on Republicans to narrow the field to prevent Donald Trump from landing the nomination, writing that candidates who are not in the top 3 or 4 after the Iowa caucuses should drop out.
I think this field's going to get narrowed before that. I think tonight the debate on Wednesday is going to narrow the field. It's going to create problems for those who didn't make the debate stage. The second debate in September, higher standard to get on the stage. I think some of the 8 candidates who made this first debate won't make that next one. So I think there is going to be a kind of winnowing process. But what we see Governor Sununu concerned about is a repeat of what happened last time around in 2016 when the rivals were unwilling to get off that stage. And that did help Donald Trump's support take the prize.